Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a lovely morning of investigating dukkha. Yay! Who hates dukkha? Who hates dukkha? We do! Yay! Which is why we're learning what it is so we can overcome it. But we've got some good news for you, which is this afternoon, I'm not giving the talk. Ayya Soma is giving a talk about dukkha. So let's all pay full attention to Ayya Soma as she talks about making friends with dukkha. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Bhante. So Bhante is particularly humorous these days when he's not giving talks and being the MC. Is that how it's called? All right. So I hope you had a good morning of investigation of dukkha. And I'm a little undecided whether to start with actually some meditation practice or to share some words. So how about actually we do a bit of meditation practice instead? So we can settle the mind. So we can get into a comfortable position. Rocking our body side to side. And you can either close your eyes or keep them slightly open, pointed to the floor, especially if you're feeling a little drowsy after eating. And take a few moments to relax the body. Taking a few deep breaths as you release any points of tension you might find in the body. Breathing in and breathing out, relaxing our entire body. And as the body becomes more and more relaxed, we can shift our attention to our mind. Looking closely with a mind of curiosity, wanting to understand the mind, looking at the mind with the mind, asking ourselves, where is the dukkha? Not looking for a memory, something that happened in the past, not looking for something that might happen in the future, but looking at our experience now. Is there any dukkha now? And if so, where is it? What is it like? Even though we're just sitting, the body is relaxed. Nothing much is happening. If we really look at our mind, you can still see some dissatisfaction. What does that feel like? Doesn't matter why it's there. We just look at it, watch it. Is it a strong sensation? Is there a light sensation? Is it a neutral feeling? Is it an unpleasant feeling? Or perhaps it's a pleasant feeling? Doesn't matter. What does it feel like? Watching it, looking at it. No different than when we look at our nails and we ask ourselves, are they long? Are they short? Are they just the right size? If stories of how and why the dukkha is there appear in the mind, we don't need to get involved with it. We just want to pay attention to the physical sensation of the dukkha. That's all that is real, that is important, that we can observe right now. It is our object of meditation. If the mind gets fixated in wanting to label what we're experiencing, we watch the physical sensation that comes from wanting, from trying to get so fixated on things. That is the dukkha. That is our object of meditation. And as we keep watching the dukkha, we'll see that it's constantly changing. Sometimes the sensation is more intense. Sometimes it's almost imperceptible. Sometimes we'll perceive it in the middle of the chest. Sometimes we'll perceive it in the lower belly. Sometimes we'll perceive it in the throat. It's constantly changing. We can't decide where it will appear. We can't decide for it to disappear. It doesn't belong to us. So if it doesn't belong to us, how can it be who we are? How can it define us? How can it have any power over us? So you can relax, open your eyes, stretch if you need to stretch.
Okay, thank you, Ayya. And welcome to Geeta, Bradley, Stacy, Ella, Marielle, Jay, and Lilia. Happy to see you all joining in. And to everybody else who's watching, welcome. So at this time, we'd like to invite Ayya Soma to say a few words on the subject of making friends with dukkha. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Bhante. And thank you all for practicing together. So, making friends with suffering is actually a title that I really liked, which is why I didn't change it, even though Ayya Soba's Bhante Suddhaso mentioned this morning was the actual author of the crafted this title, and I quite liked it because that very much, in one shape or form, reflected or described quite neatly the experience that I have with dukkha through my Buddhist practice. So before my Buddhist practice, I was very much actually the description that Bhante gave this morning, which is very hilarious. He's becoming more and more Italian. He gesticulates, makes lots of emotions when he talks. And I'm becoming more and more austere, more Anglo-Saxon, very poised. But yeah, so there was a lot of overwhelming dukkha and a lot of dwelling in dukkha, which was not necessarily the most pleasant environment to be in, not the most pleasant mind to hang out with. Actually, a lot of times it was really unpleasant for me to be with my mind, which is why I would get into strong bouts of depression, because it was unbearable, all this suffering. Sometimes there were reasons for the suffering to be there that I could pinpoint. Some other times it was unexplainable. There were all the things on the checklist that you're supposed to have. Obviously not in Buddhism, but in the conventional society, of what you're supposed to kind of look forward to. And there have been times in my life where I had most of them, if not all of them, on the checklist. Great relationship, job that I liked, place where I wanted to live, cool friends, check, check, check. And I was like, wow, overwhelming dukkha, overwhelming suffering. So what has changed with my Buddhist practice is that actually I haven't experienced depression in more than 4 years now. And why is that so? Because I made friends with dukkha. I started understanding, looking clearly instead of pretending, not acknowledging it, or building onto it. So when we think and we start obsessing about our suffering, we start creating stories that don't match reality, which then create extra layers of suffering, extra and extra and extra layers of suffering. But when we stop doing that, and we're just with the dukkha, we just start seeing things as they are. And they're pretty manageable, actually. Because you're not adding up, it's kind of like carrying one rock as opposed to trying to carry an entire building. It's impossible to carry an entire building. You'll get crushed just by the idea of having to carry a little building. But a rock, you're kind of like, okay, I could carry it around. And while I'm carrying it around, I can see it, become acquainted with it. And ultimately, then I can drop it down. I can learn how to drop it. And then eventually just learn how to leave it there. Just drop it once and for all. So it was really interesting for me, actually. This morning I did practice quite well. Where's the dukkha? I was constantly contemplating this. Do you know how much sitting meditation I've done? 0. Since after Bhante Suddhaso guided us in sitting meditation up until the meditation that we just did, I did 0 sitting or walking sort of, how do you say, conventional meditation. Yet, I'm telling you that I meditated a lot of times, contemplated dukkha. So why am I saying that? So today at the monastery, we decided to practice only having 1 hour of work period and have the schedule of no schedule, so that each person could decide what was necessary, needed for them. So I wanted to dedicate my time this morning to plant research, because we need to do some planting here at the monastery. So I was trying to convince Bhante Suddhaso to give the talk at 2:30. And he was like, no, you're going to do it at 2:30. So I tried once, then I tried twice, then I tried 3 times, like throughout the whole morning. And it was so interesting how much dukkha this whole like having to give a talk at 2:30 was producing in my mind. And I had only a few times where I was actually really enjoying this plant research that I was doing. And most of the time I was like still doing the research, but having like kind of like the how do you say, underlying, like in the back, the kind of like, oh, well, if only I didn't have to do the talk at 2:30, then I could fully dedicate myself to this, because I could just like keep obsessing about plants for the whole day and not having to distract myself on anything. I really don't understand why I said blah, 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 blah. Then sometimes I would drop it and I would be fully doing the research of the plant and understanding, okay, this should be here, and this is the companion, and this is the companion. And when I was doing that, there was actually lots of joy, because I was focused in the present moment where I was doing whatever the task at hand. Whenever my mind would go to the future, there was this dukkha rising. I was like, well, where is the dukkha? Is the dukkha the talk? Actually, I normally, whenever, like right now, I'm actually kind of having a good time. Now that I got a little bit more comfortable with the stream of consciousness, more than comfortable, it's like used to the stream of consciousness. It's actually kind of enjoyable. Thank you, Bhante. So I was like, okay, so clearly it's not that. It's not like at 2:30 I had to learn how to drive a car. No, that sounds like quite unpleasant. I don't know how to drive. Yeah, trivia. Facts. And it's something that I never wanted to understand. So it was like, it's not, there. So where is the dukkha? And as usual, the dukkha is not giving the talk. The dukkha is not Bhante saying that I should be giving the talk and he won't give the talk, or whatever external thing. Or the dukkha, it's not the fact that I don't have enough time to do my plant research. I would have had enough time regardless, because if I wasn't giving the talk, I would have been as he is right in front of me. So clearly not researching plants. So the problem is not the object that we think it is, but is that sense of expectation, that waiting for, the craving for things to be in a different way than they really are. So always not wanting, not accepting reality. Always wanting for it to be different. So then we can create so many different storylines and start believing them. So I was going, okay, that's where the dukkha is. It's always craving. We always think it's so bizarre, like the Four Noble Truths are so simple. It's like real common sense. We get it straight away, very simple. But then whenever we're experiencing suffering, we're always looking for so many million different reasons why we're suffering. And it always ends up being desire. And we're like, wait, but it was desire already. So why are we, why didn't I think about it being desire? Why do I always think that it's something else? That it's the object of the desire? We keep on making that mistake, don't we? Over and over again. So it's interesting, because then this desire also prevents us from being in the present moment, because we're constantly, it was always 2:30 in my mind. Not always, but whenever I would go into that stream of consciousness, it was already 2:30. It's already 2:30. It's like, I don't have enough time, it's 2:30. Like, no, it's like 10. It becomes 2:30 because we keep on thinking that it's 2:30 from 10 to 2:30. So it was just interesting playing around with my mind in that way, and also remembering a teaching that I had actually in formal meditation by observing the dukkha during a retreat where this person, I always get triggered. I'm one of those people that gets really triggered with respiratory issues of people around me. Apparently, it's a very common thing amongst meditators. So there was this person who would go every, I don't know, like 10 seconds. She would go like, or something like that, like a kind of weird, sharp sound with the breath, because she had some kind of cold and it would come out a little bit weird. And I remember like the aversion coming up over and over, like every time she would have the breathing problem, my mind would go like, and it was so interesting because as the time went by, I would just keep on going like, but the cadence of her sort of breath was always the same. And at a certain point in meditation, I remember looking at it, looking at my reaction, looking at my aversion, and realizing that I was getting triggered, not by the trigger, but by the expectation, the waiting for the trigger to happen. So once I stopped waiting, when I recognized that, I saw it in the mind, I dropped the desire, the sort of waiting, and I would stay in every single moment. And in between the triggers, it was totally fine. It was totally okay. And then when the trigger would arise, I would practice being okay, being triggered. So this morning, I did the same thing. At a certain point, after going through that pattern again in day-to-day life, then I was like, okay, when the thoughts arise that I have to do this thing that I don't want to do, or that Bhante should be doing it, not me, in whatever story, I can just be okay with having, kind of laughing about the suffering that I'm creating for myself. So I started laughing about it and just becoming friends with it. And when you become friends with someone, something actually in this case, it's no different than becoming friends with someone. You start knowing them more and more, and you start accepting them more and more. It's much easier, for example, to live with someone that you're friends with than someone you're not friends with. If you've had roommates in the past, all my roommate, for example, past situations in the past weren't exactly memorable. I wasn't a big fan of the roommate situation, except when the roommates were my friends or loved ones. Except for family, that's a little bit complicated. But being in a sort of voluntary relationship with a person, whether it's romantic or a friend, that you actually get into that relationship voluntarily, it's much more pleasant. And it's not that these people don't have defilements and the non-friends have defilements. They equally have defilements. It's just that you're more acceptant towards your friends and loved ones. You know them better. You're more willing to overcome the sort of potential issues that can arise. So this is how we have to deal with our emotions. Instead of becoming either some like sort of stranger that unfortunately you have to share the room with, just really starting becoming friends with them, really starting to learn them, understanding them, becoming okay with them, and laughing with them. And the more we do this, the less we become overwhelmed by them. Because also we understand that there's not much that we can do about them. What we can do is not create further conditions, causes and conditions for certain traits, for certain experiences to happen. But whatever we're experiencing right now it's the product of something that we've done in the past. So all we can do is understand. So it's no different than, like in my planting thing. I'm actually quite obsessed. I go around the yard and I found this app, which is really great, that you take pictures of weeds and plants that grow, and then you put it on the app and it tells you exactly the plant name and all the different features, which makes me really excited. So I've been learning a lot, and so I go and I look at all these different details and I watch them, and then I'm like, oh, look at the chickens, they like this plant but they don't like that plant. What kind of conditions, causes and conditions? But I haven't created this plant, in the sense, like, I didn't decide for that weed to be planted here and there. It was either the monks who planted the monks that were living in this building beforehand, or nature, causes and conditions that are not in my power right now to do anything. It's not that I think, oh, I would like roses everywhere. Clean up. Oh, there are roses everywhere. No, I have to look, understand what is currently here, understand the soil, understand all the different causes and conditions in the land. And then I can say, okay, well, I don't like this particular part of the land seems unhealthy, so perhaps I should not repeat the conditions. Put the same causes and conditions that made this to happen. But I really like, for example, we have a nice, beautiful patch of clover that is beautiful. It's so great, very soft. You walk on it, very beautiful. I love it. And really low maintenance. You don't need to mow it. It's quite nice. And then there's all this lawn that is really not as pleasant with a lot of patches where stuff doesn't really grow properly because of whatever, lawns are unsustainable. So I'm like, well, clearly the unsustainable lawn, I don't want to create the same conditions, but yes, the clover, how do I create the same conditions for this clover to be really happy here and extend it in other parts of the property as well? So learning, looking, objectively seeing, watching, and you see it's not me, it's not mine. The front yard, the backyard, all of these causes and conditions are just there. They're not who I am. But what I can do in every single moment is to create new causes and conditions in the front yard, in the backyard, and in my mind. But I need to become friends with it. I need to become friends with the weeds and not start hating all the weeds. That would be quite bizarre if I started hating all the weeds. Then I would go and try to get all the pesticides, and then the pesticides would kill also the plants that I like, and then I need to get the fertilizer. Oh my God, it's such a headache. So crazy. That's basically a lot of yards that I'm seeing here. There's like all these signs with big pesticide that don't walk here, don't walk there. Very scary, actually. So we need to learn, understand the conditions in order to make something new. So make friends with your backyard, and make friends with the dukkha that is in the mind. Right, so that's all I have to share this afternoon. I hope that it was beneficial in any way, and if it wasn't, well, I'm sorry about that. But great opportunity to look at where is the dukkha.
Well, thank you, Ayya, for sharing your dukkha. And at this time, if anyone has any questions for Ayya, please go ahead and type them in, and I'll read them out for her. Or if there's no questions, then we can let you get back to the rest of your practice. So there's some thank yous. Hello to Sally, to Good Enough Dhamma. I'm not sure who that is, but I hope it's good enough. Hello, Catalina, Edward. Edward's pointing out many weeds are edible.
Yeah, it's true. It's so exciting. We have lots of them actually in the yard that are edible. We also have wild onion and garlic.
And Bradley says, good point about us always trying to outsmart the Four Noble Truths, that there must be some other cause.
Yeah. But that's also what builds faith, right? Like the more we think we're smarter than the Buddha, even if we don't consciously formulate it, but subconsciously kind of go in that direction. And the more then we look honestly at our experience, and we have to always say the Buddha's right, because we just can't prove him wrong. And that builds faith, builds lots of joy in the mind. Actually, whenever the Buddha proves me wrong, I'm so delighted. And I try really hard. Like my mind really tries to rebel. Always looking for other reasons. But then I'm like, oh yeah, well, I'm in good hands. I really trust the Dhamma.
And Yasmin asks, upon noticing my own risings of suffering, I began to think about others' suffering as well. I struggle with when and how to intercede in others' dukkha. Struggle with when and how to intercede in others' dukkha, and was wondering, how does Buddhism address that for lay people?
Well, there's a few different ways to approach this question, but I would say that in order to understand others, you need to first understand yourself. And in order to understand yourself, you also need to understand others. So it goes vice versa. Actually, we had this brief kind of conversation after lunchtime, Bhante and I. Since I was a little child, actually, I would always observe other people in order to understand myself, and vice versa. So when you are though in meditation practice and when you are experiencing dukkha, I think that is the place for you to just look at what is currently present. Because otherwise the risk is if you start thinking about other people's dukkha, you are creating stories and projecting. And you quite really not understand what's going on. So for example, you can see that a lot with animals. So I've always been quite fascinated, not always, but in my adult life, actually, I'm quite fascinated by animals because they're very actually similar to humans, yet they have radically different ways of expressing their emotions, their interests. Like, for example, cats and dogs that both have tails. Like if a dog wags his tail, means he's happy. If a cat wags his tail, it's actually the opposite of happy. It means it's agitated and ready to attack. In the best case scenario, it's just that they're a little bit uncertain or curious. But you can only tell that in relation to other sort of features that they shift, the ears, etc. So anyway, if you start observing animals, then you start understanding their language. And you actually learn also lots of things about your psychology. Like, for example, Stan, the cat here, has lots of dukkha. And you start seeing how it's no different than the humans that live here. It's just that we make progress with our dukkha because we have the Buddhist teachings, and he makes less of a sort of progress than all the residents in this building. But lots of people might, if they don't really observe animals' communication, they start creating stories about why they behave in a particular way or another way. So you'll see the common things about cats being, they did it on purpose. So they did that to be mean. Actually, no, the cat had no intention to be mean or doing something as a retaliation. They're just following their nature to be cat. They just, kick the thing because why not? There's no problem for a cat this has no importance to a cat. There's no difference between these two objects. They're both completely insults and useless. So there is the reason why we think it's okay for a cat to maybe push this object but not push this object is a qualitative value that we are giving and then we are attributing to the cat. Or for example, chickens. Yeah, that's the classic thing that whenever we have retreats, people are always very concerned about the chickens sleeping outside because it's really cold. So the first thing that people think is that chickens should be put indoors with a heat, or kept outdoors, but with heating supplies. And actually, chickens are descendants from the dinosaurs. So they're completely fine, totally cool, like walking in the snow, staying outside. Like they're like, yeah, that's completely cool. We're totally fine. No problem at all. They already know what to do. So we think that they're experiencing dukkha because we think that everybody's exactly like us, like the way that we think and do. So it's a story. They're having completely like total fine time during the winter. In fact, actually, they like more cold weather sometimes than definitely the peak of the summer. Actually, they always want to be in the shade, even though they're also tropical animals. They're very interesting creatures. Anyway, this is long story long to say that there's a time and place. So first you need to learn your mind, and then you can start practicing compassion by understanding that the minds of others aren't terribly different than yours. But compassion doesn't mean that you feel sorry for them. Compassion just means that you understand that we're all trembling. We're all in this together. My suffering is no different than his suffering. And you want to help other beings, but not take on their struggle and become the martyr and victim and overwhelm and get not only the building that you normally try to put on your shoulders, but also collect all the buildings in the neighborhood. Complete recipe for disaster.
Okay, and similarly, Sally is asking, why does understanding other people's dukkha help understand our own dukkha?
I think I addressed that.
Yeah. So that's the last question. So if there's nothing else, we wish you the best with your practice. So please continue investigating dukkha throughout the day. So you now had some instructions from both me and Ayya Soma. So please continue. Oh, Bradley says he has a question. Okay, ask your question, and we'll see what Ayya says. So we're waiting for Bradley's question.
Well, while he writes the question, I will just encourage you today to take it easy and relax, kind of like we're doing here at the monastery. So not being too rigid. I have to do 3 hours in full lotus of meditation, and then I'm gonna do like 26 minutes of walking meditation. Like not having that attitude, but rather following obviously the 8 precepts. But also letting go of the planning and kind of following, what can I do? What do I want to dedicate my time in? And whenever we're engaged in whatever we're doing, whenever there is dukkha arising, looking at it and going, where is the dukkha? Where is it arising? And then if you decide to do meditation practice, similarly, if you, for example, are doing breathing meditation and you start controlling your breath, and you're like, oh, I can't really have a spontaneous breath. Oh, there's so much dukkha. Well, where is the dukkha? Looking at it, exploring it, both in your meditation practice on the cushion and in your meditation practice off the cushion. So developing that investigative sort of mind state, curiosity, and looking at it, experiencing it, and being with it.
And Bradley asks, how can you help someone unravel their dukkha? Like they're confused about why they feel a certain way. Someone asked me the other day to help them, and I was at a bit of a loss because they were bewildered about something that seemed so clear to me. Specifically, they were confused about why they were so unlucky to be going through this pandemic.
So the original question was,
how can you help someone unravel their dukkha? Like they're confused about why they feel a certain way.
Well, first of all, by listening to them. So one of the greatest, obviously, successful therapy methods are that actually the therapist shuts up, but doesn't say anything, and the person talks for however long the therapy session is, like an hour. I think that's the Freudian technique. So like maybe you ask 1 or 2 questions. That's all it is. So if someone asks you for help, first of all, it depends whether or not they're asking for help or they're actually asking for help. So sometimes we're asking for help, but we're not really asking for help. We just want to kind of let it all out. And sometimes we're genuinely interested. So if this person is genuinely interested, then you can explain your point of view, saying either this is my point of view, or according to my spiritual tradition. So Buddhism says that this is occurring for this and this other reason. So you start having a conversation based on actual wanting to mutually understand one another. Like really investigating the investigating the dukkha that the person is experiencing. And aside from like, oh, why me? Why did this happen to me? Why is it such a big problem that this is happening? Why is it such a big deal? You know, is the person actually having lots of issues in terms of, there are lots of people that have either relatives at the hospital or they're at the hospital and they're sick. We just spoke the other day about the family that the father just died. So they're experiencing a lot of tangible distress. So is it that type of problem, or is it the problem that we just can't really go outside? Is it more of a privileged issue? And that's also not to be discounted, but it's worth investigating it and understanding. So if it's in the first case, it's more like, okay, how can we help this person? How can we help them find the requisites? And in the second case, it's more, how can this person, how can we guide this person towards an unconditional happiness that is, not dependent on whether or not they can have barbecues with their friends and big parties and go clubbing and whatever it is that they want to do. So we're talking about two different things, whether one doesn't have their needs met, their basic needs met, and what someone has their basic needs met, shelter, food, medicine, etc., clothing, and as more of an existential kind of dukkha. But in both cases, really investigating, sharing that time with the person to go, okay, what do you need materially and what do you need spiritually? And how can I help? Let's see. All right.
Okay, so we've lost video, but there's still audio. So Sally says, I felt this method is similar to Huato. Keep asking, where is the dukkha?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. There is definitely an element to that. Because, you can find some answers. I find it a bit of a gradual path too. Because at a certain point, you think that there is, that you find the answer, but then you're like, is that really the answer? Where is the dukkha? So it's a constant answer. You keep questioning. So great. Yes. If you think it's like Pato, you're practicing correctly.
Great. And that's the last question. So please continue your practice for the rest of the afternoon. So constantly investigating. Where is the dukkha? Where is the dukkha? And we'll come together again at 7:30. All right. Have a great
Sadhu,
sadhu, sadhu.